So hi everybody, I'm the moderator today. I'm horror and fantasy author Matsu J. Steger, and welcome to Best Friends, Rivals, and Nemeses, Building Effective Character Relationships. Just so everybody knows, this event is sponsored by Renaissance Press, a Canadian publisher dedicated to publishing, supporting, and uplifting marginalized authors. Thanks to their generosity, we've been able to include live captions with this panel. You can find a link to the Renaissance in the chat. Diana, can you put that link in there for me, please? Thank you. As a displaced Anishinaabe person, I'm Indigenous American. I'd like to take a short moment just to give respect to my ancestors and many of my kin who have suffered at the hands of colonization. Many of us live on colonized lands or are descendants of immigrants and colonizers, and the privilege we have to sit here and learn together now comes with a really dark history. If we as a society are ever going to grow and continue learning, we have to acknowledge the past harms and work toward a future where that harm is put to an end. Issues like the many missing Indigenous women and trans people across North America, my great-grandmother among them, and the destroying of native territories for pipelines are a concern for all of us. I hope that we can all commit time to creating change within our own communities. With that, all out of the way, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Can you all please introduce yourself one at a time with your name, your pronouns, and a brief sentence of why you wanted to participate in this panel, starting with Jade, and then we'll go Diana, Lex, Robin from there.
Hi, I'm Jade. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently working on a fantasy fiction trilogy, not really nanoing, but kind of. And it's multi-point of view, so I'm really interested in how my characters relate to each other, work together, and work against themselves.
Hi, I'm Diana Pomeroy. I am a fantasy, sci-fi, and romance writer, and I participate in a lot of Twitter chats online through the Spinning Authors chat, the Weeknight Writers chat, and then I also currently host Creature Chat. I am currently in the process of editing my first novel, which is called Yara's Crossing. It's about a dinosaur that basically makes her way across an entire continent. And the reason why I wanted to be a part of this panel is because I feel that one of my strengths as a writer is developing characters, and I enjoy doing it. I love creating character relationships, and I'm glad that I could add my content to this panel today.
Hi, I'm Lex Vranick, she, her. I am a horror author, currently nanoing very, very slowly. And I have always been a super character-driven person when both watching or reading media and writing. So that's why I wanted to participate in this one.
I am Robin Quinn, she, her. I am a fiction author. I mostly write I try to write comic scripts. I've been published as a horror author for a short story called In a Place Like This through Decoded Pride. I wanted to participate today just because I want to hear basically what everyone else had to say. Like I have my own reasons for most of my stories featuring usually a duo or more of characters that build upon their dynamic, but I want to see what everyone else had to say and what I could learn from that.
Awesome, thank you guys so much. So I'm just gonna get right into the thick of it. We're gonna start with our questions, and we're gonna go in the exact same pattern that we you guys introduced yourselves, just to make everything easy. If somebody wants to interject, just like raise your hand and I'll intervene so that you can kind of back and forth or piggyback off each other. Just a side note that if anybody says anything that is clearly from a place of privilege, I am going to call it out, and we will stop the conversation to be like, yeah, my big one is going to be if you bring up that tropes are passe or anything like that, I'm going to stop you because tropes are not passe for marginalized creators. So our first question is, what is your favorite type of character relationship to write and why?
I like writing rivals. I particularly like how the dynamic can challenge each of the characters to grow, um, using really specific types of friction. You can, amp it up and tone it down, and it really helps to be able to do pacing that way, because then you can have your minor conflicts that feed into your larger conflicts, or that they're thinking about emotions from the previous conflict that's going to complicate the next thing that happens. And I just really enjoy that type of dynamic, especially when sort of rivals become best friends or vice versa.
I would have to say that really my favorite type of relationship to write is more of like the best friends romantic kind of relationship. I've always found writing banter and dialogue really fun. Just having the characters kind of play off each other, getting to know characters in that way is really interesting to me. And I don't know, for some reason, I always fall into writing like a romance story. I never intend to when I first start out. And then all of a sudden the characters just develop in that direction. So it's just a lot of fun.
I do a lot of sibling relationships, and part of that is a little bit of wish fulfillment. I lost my brother when I was young, so a lot of it is kind of getting to explore that on the page. And there's also so many different dynamics that you can explore. And I'm also a very, very big found family person, almost in the same way of like choosing your own siblings, because that's kind of something that I had to do growing up.
I think my answer is actually kind of similar to Diana's, where I end up writing relationships a lot of the time. The two stories that I've put out both featured either characters that were in a relationship or characters who were attracted to each other in some way. And just building off of that, mostly because my second story, the one I actually have published, I think it was because I saw Jennifer's body. I was like, but what if I wrote a story where those two type of characters dated for real and just ended up writing it and getting it published?
I think the love story between Needy and Jennifer is what we all needed, Robin. So thank you. So the next question is, how much do you develop character relationships before you start writing your book?
That is a tricky question because it's kind of organic. For the three main characters who've kind of always lived in my universe, and I've mostly been trying to work out like how to distill parts of their relationships into book sizes. Those ones were kind of always existed, but the challenge for them was I knew where I wanted to be with them eventually, and it was kind of backtracking to how did we build that trust and those relationships, and what interactions made significant moments that you can call back to, like those core memories that you have with that person that kind of frames how you come to think about them. And I also have some other relationships where I invented like a secondary character that was specifically for a particular purpose, and then they just kind of decided to expand themselves and become an entire second outline trilogy. But yeah.
I think that's, go ahead.
So yeah, some of them were planned, and then some of them just kind of organically happened.
I was going to say, I think that's interesting because I, in a similar kind of way, the character relationships, yeah, they do just happen in my stories. And that's especially true for my novel, Yara's Crossing. And it's funny because when I first started making this story, I did start out with a comic book series. And so the characters were literally illustrated. And that's how I started to really develop them in more detail, was through those illustrations, through those just drawing something, writing it, and then turning that into the basis for what those characters are going to be like, how they're going to interact with each other. And the relationship between Yara and Slacktalk, those are the two main characters in my novel. Initially, their relationship was established before I started writing the story. And then I just kind of worked backwards in much the same way that Jade mentioned, where it's like you have this starting point, and then how did they build up that trust, and how did that relationship deepen over time?
I'm very much a pantser, so I kind of develop the characters as individuals first and then throw them on the page and let them do what they want to do. I found that if I try to force it too much, the interactions just feel very stiff and fake. So I just kind of don't do a ton of planning on who's going to be close with who, and I let them figure that out for themselves.
I guess in my case, the thing that came to mind was for my comic. In the comic, I had two characters who were girlfriends, and originally, like I guess 5 or 6 years ago, when I first started writing the story, it was mainly from the main character Aiko's perspective, where she was interested in the girl, and as time went on, and I kept going back to the drawing board and changing stuff about the story, I started wondering like, how can I develop the love interest? So she eventually kind of became the secondary character, and she had her own background stuff to deal with, even though she's not like a superhero in the same way that her girlfriend is. She has her own whole side of her own, sorry, her whole own side of the story that's kind of developed over those years that I eventually hope to come back to once I start writing that story again.
Okay, that's I feel that way about a lot of books, so I'll just come back to that when I'm ready for it. So our next question is, what are some of the less obvious ways that you can illustrate a character relationship within a scene?
Could you come back to me on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Diana, you can go.
For me, this is a very good question for me. This one I really had to think about for a while, because I wouldn't say that my character interactions are always gonna be obvious, but it kind of is, it reads that way. And so I would think that it's more like some symbolic messages that I put throughout the story. In the case of Yara's Crossing, throughout the story, there's the presence of Ammonites, and these represent this meaning of like perpetual life, of living forever, and also this kind of connection that the protagonists have with each other. It always goes back to that symbolism. And I think that having that is like a little hint throughout the story that I placed in the very beginning, and then continuing that on until the very end, where it becomes obvious that this then represents not just, the surface level stuff. This is actually representative of the building and growth of a relationship. And in particular, the relationship between Yara and Slacktalk is represented that way. And it's funny because I didn't intend for it to happen that way. When I was writing the story initially, I didn't consider that at all. And now that I've, look back on it, I really thought about it, and I decided to work that into the story as kind of like this underlying layer of, there's your hint, and, let's see where this goes.
Like Diana, I really had to think about this question a lot too. It's a really, really great question. I love it. And for me, I was kind of thinking of, in my current NaNoWriMo novel, it's very much a found family sort of thing, based on the kind of trope of these people should not ever be in a room together, but here they are and they love each other, even though they kind of want to rip each other's heads off all the time. And one of the things that I noticed when I was writing in how I differentiate each of their relationships to each other is their body language and how they respond to each other in that way. So one character tends to be very closed off. She's a lot of crossed arms and head down in the corner. But when she's with a particular character that she's quite close to, she opens up a little bit more, will be a little bit more physical with him, will touch his arm, will let him hug her, but won't necessarily do the same thing with other people. Facial expressions, how they're responding to one another, and those sorts of things.
I think in my case, there's a story I'm writing right now that I can't really tell title for or anything, but there's a case where one character has a crush on another character, and it seems like, well, you assume it's another character that she has a crush on, like you assume she has a crush on her best friend who's a guy, but she ends up having a crush on that guy's girlfriend. And slowly over the course of the story, you start to subtly know by things she knows about this girl, by things she says about her that at first seem antagonistic, or like think, how would she know that? How would she know that well if she doesn't like being around this person? How would she understand that? How would she notice this? It's like, it was the real reason she feels uncomfortable in this situation being around them, that sort of thing.
Okay, so within a scene, one of the things that I've been interested in exploring myself for differentiating relationships and stuff is just learning how to modulate voice in dialogue so that it's closer to a human experience. Because a lot of times my first draft dialogue is very simple and it's kind of just like too on the nose. People aren't that direct most of the time. We tend to phrase things slightly differently, or according to how we think about the situation, how we think other people should think about the situation. And there's all of these different emotional pegs that are playing on how we choose our words and when we choose to speak and how quickly, or just how the words come out. Even punctuation or what's not said can be just as loud. If a character has a particular conviction about something, and they think about it, they have conversations with their friends about it, but then they don't say anything when an actual situation happens, that says a lot about the character too.
Are you thinking or are you done?
I'm done, sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't going to railroad you here. I really like this question. I like you guys' answers really a lot, because I recently, I'm going to be published as a short story. My short story is going to be published in Out There, into the queer yonder. It's Out There by Inkyard Press. It's going to be out next year. But I wrote a short story, and I had to decide, how do I make these two fall in love in 4,000 words?
That's
So,
challenging.
so I introduced the characters without them knowing who each other is, because one of them is wearing a helmet, and then as it creeps forward, they have backstory together, and I just kind of ease it in. And I think that people underestimate how powerful certain things can be, like mystery and not understanding someone sounding familiar but you're not really sure, and amping up someone else's like anxiety can really develop a scene,
Yeah,
especially
not
if it's
having
coming from the
confirmation of
POV.
something.
And they're so confused and worried. Yeah. So for our next question is actually really spot on for this, is how do you show relationships changing and evolving throughout the story?
I'm going to go back to dialogue modulation on this one. When you really pin down how your character sounds like on a baseline, like before you have your inciting incident, you kind of have to have that idea of how they react in no stress situations. And then you kind of add on different modulations for that. And when you first encounter, say, a situation, the character is absolutely shocked, they don't know how to respond, and they have sort of a flight response or maybe a freeze response. And then you can introduce a similar situation or a similar feeling that they have to deal with later, and mark how the response changes. That can be like word choice, when they choose to speak up, like instead of being the last one to speak up, maybe they're the first one, or they step forward in the middle, or they're the one to initiate a plan instead of just waiting for everyone else's idea and critiquing it. So yeah, just changing the reaction to a similar situation. And this is kind of helpful where you can do like callbacks to different things, either characters referencing the last time, or even the character just reflecting on how their responses change, like noticing that within themselves.
For me, it's funny because kind of building on what Montu said, where you're kind of like the characters in my story initially, like Yara and Slacktalk, Yara in particular, there is no directly stated queer identity in my story, but for those who have read the story so far, they're like, yeah, it's clear that your character is both autistic and asexual, because she wants nothing to do with relationships whatsoever. And this makes her very different from all of the other dinosaurs in her flock. They're all like, well, that's weird, but she does not care. She's all right. And when she comes across Slacktalk in the beginning, she's actually kind of annoyed. She really wants nothing to do with him, the poor guy. She wants nothing to do with anyone. And he takes a gift from her as a sign that this is something that has there might be something here. So he takes the chance, he takes the initiative to start conversation with her, but he doesn't force a relationship initially. So in that sense, he's a little respectful. He's like, well, I get where you're coming from, and I totally support what you're going to do in making this journey on your own. And he totally gets that she's supposed to do that by herself. And yet he's there. And his presence just continues to go on throughout the novel. And it's funny because by the end, of course, there's a totally different situation. I won't get into that here because it's big spoilers. But basically, their relationship becomes a lot deeper and a lot more nuanced than what it was initially. And does her orientation change? No. I mean, she's still who she is. It's just that she starts to view relationships as meaningful rather than as something to be, is something kind of in the way. And so in that way, that personality change happens gradually throughout the story. And it's really a sign of growth between them both, where they each kind of build off of each other. And it's interesting how I've decided to play this out, because as I said, when I initially started this, I actually had the characters fleshed out before I began the novel, but the way that the characters spoke for themselves as I went on just completely changed the direction that I had initially for the story.
So for me, a lot of it is I work in horror. A lot of it is life or death situations for the characters. A lot of dealing with trust and distrust and relying on other people. And a lot of what I think about, because when you're talking about character relationships changing, I think my brain automatically goes to positive change and characters coming together. But you also have the potential that some may have a falling out, or someone is actually the villain in the group. And so I kind of draw a lot from real life, and what do I notice in myself when I am getting closer to somebody or want to get closer to somebody? What do I notice in myself when I start pulling away? How do I behave differently around different people? And how can I put that in my characters and make that affect how they interact with each other and the world around them?
I guess I kind of have a similar answer to Lex, just because I was thinking about my short story. It was a horror story, and it kind of starts out with the POV character kind of being mildly annoyed with the girl she's hanging out with, just kind of the circumstances of the situation they're in. She doesn't necessarily want the company, but she kind of needs it to pursue the information that she's after. And as they're going along, she kind of starts to notice like, oh, maybe I'm a little bit attracted to this girl. I don't like she's not particularly like happy about it at first, but like events like a catalyst happens through the creature of the story that kind of forces them to kind of reconsider that aspect of their relationship and that aspect of whether or not she would pursue having a friendship or something more with this other character.
I just want
I
to
really,
add something to
oh,
that.
go ahead.
Sure. I think it's important that like there needs to be a conversation, even if the character is changing over time internally and only they notice, they still have like the way we see that in a story is some kind of internal dialogue. The way we see change is in how they're having conversations differently, or the fact that they are having these conversations with other characters around them and are becoming more or less open or learning or rejecting. And like those tiny choices every time they have a conversation or choose to not engage or reject something, each little choice adds up to the change that they're making for themselves.
I think that is an excellent point, because I think what people tend to forget is one of the biggest things about building character relationships is the character arc that comes with that. Because character arcs, they make books tick. You can write a character arc that's a flat line, but there's still something there that makes the conflict affected in
Well, even
some
trying to
way.
not become something, trying to stay status quo
Right.
is still making choices. You're
Yeah,
making choices no matter
absolutely.
what you do.
Yeah, not making a choice is a
It's
choice.
still a
Yeah,
choice.
absolutely. And I don't know if you guys follow KM Wyland, but
Yes,
she is a
love her.
huge, her character arc
Love
stuff,
her.
her breakdown for that is amazing. And like that's my character
Everyone
arc
go listen to her
Bible.
podcast.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, so I have a few questions for you guys that are, but by few, I mean couple, that I came up with while we were talking. Obviously, I'm a writer too, and I spend a lot of time writing and rewriting, and I've watched characters in my books that I've read over 100 times now that is now going through revisions again for an editor. I've watched characters completely go from one type of person to a whole other type of person. And I would love to know if that has ever happened to you and what is the biggest change a character has made through revisions for you and how that affected the dynamics with the other characters.
I haven't done any revisions yet, so other people can go first if they want.
Absolutely.
So my revisions are basically, when I write, I tend to just write a lot and then I'll stop and edit as I go. And one of the biggest revisions that I made to the major plot of my story, Yara's Crossing, was in my antagonist, where initially the antagonist was actually an ally, was actually a sort of a mentor character when I initially drafted the story. And then eventually, as I was reworking the story, it got twisted into a true villain, where this character suddenly became, and it's so interesting how that happened. Like I wasn't expecting it, is the thing. Like as I was writing, it just, this character all of a sudden decided, like, I'm not going to be the helpful person in this tale. I'm going to basically take that idea and turn it on its head. And I thought that that was interesting. And in a way, I wrote that character is someone who is very insidious, where it's like initially they come off as, I want to help you, I want to be your friend. And by the end, it's terrifying because of how connected those characters were in the beginning, and then by the end it's like completely different.
That spectrum of like the antagonist can be totally different too, because they can flip from like maybe not like an ally, but like people who respect each other but still have very different opinions, like Professor X and Magneto, who are still opposed, but they still get along.
Yeah. And that's initially how it, it's funny because that's initially how it happened, but then it diverged from that and it got even darker from that point. So.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that a bit because I had one novella that I was working on that kind of followed a slasher formula. So your typical final girl at the end, and kind of kept noticing that her story, when it ended, just fell flat for me and it didn't feel completed. And I kind of realized that it's because she was kind of supposed to flip it on its head and sort of become the hunter herself. And it was not anything I ever imagined for her, but it wound up working out really well. And I've had a similar thing happen with my current NaNoWriMo novel, has been through so many different iterations. And the two comic relief characters have completely transformed, where one of them has become the moral backbone of the entire group, where he really wasn't supposed to have a very large role at all. And the other one kind of kept being the comic relief, but also became this like safe space for everybody and kind of this peacekeeping character. And that was never really a role that I envisioned for him, but it suits him really well.
It's a nice surprise.
It is.
I guess in my case, I kind of touched on this earlier with my comic. The love interest character was, well, actually both of them really. In the case of the love interest, over time, she developed from just kind of a character who wasn't really the secondary, but kind of a person of interest for the lead, into like the secondary character of the story, with their own backstory and everything. And even beyond that, the main character herself, originally like 6 years ago, this has started out as a fan project for a completely different character that I just felt wasn't being appreciated enough. And that didn't pick up. So I was like, screw it, I'm gonna make my own character. I'm gonna make my own original story. And it took 5 years to actually get anything done, and it ended up being a 10-page comic about them going on a date, mostly because of money, but it would have been longer if I could have. But it was interesting seeing her develop, not only from like what I originally what she had originally been inspired by, but like what it changed about her based on my interest over the years, because she's kind of like, currently she's more inspired by stuff like Kamen Rider. So it's just interesting seeing that change to what I had in mind for her, to what other characters were in the story and what roles they had to play as well, and how that could even change in the future.
I really love that. So I've written 12 books, and I've rewritten the one that is on submission right now several times. When the one that was on submission, I had started it, one of the side characters was actually the antagonist, and now she is one of like the best friends of the main characters and dating his best friend. So, and one of my favorite characters now, and absolutely one of my agent's favorite characters. So it's just, I really love how revisions can change the way we think about character dynamics and the structure of those characters. I've flipped genders of characters and so on. So I think that when character dynamics aren't working, I think that's something that a lot of writers need to explore. Is this character wrong? Did I write it wrong? And then explore those roles and that character's gender, their personality, whatever is not working. Brandon Sanderson talks about Mistborn in one of his lectures, where Vin was actually originally a boy. I don't know if any of you have read Mistborn. But yeah, it had started as a boy, and he was like, this isn't working. The book wouldn't work. And so he switched Vin to a girl, and that made everything fall into place for him. And it's amazing how much a character dynamic can change based on gender presentation, the roles that they take as a person. Like if Vin hadn't been a thief, what would she have been like, kind of thing. And that's one of the things that I look at when I'm building dynamics is how two people get along like if you have two people with the same personality, there's a really strong chance that they actually won't get along because they're too similar. Which brings me to my next question is, how do you keep your characters different?
Hmm. See, my characters kind of just appear in my head and they are already very different. So it's really more a process of me getting to know them and interviewing them through writing scenes about them, trying to figure out what they want to be, how they want to be seen, how they like what kind of words or phrases they use most common, things that they carry around. I tend to, instead of changing my characters to fit a plot, I will actually change more of the plot elements to fit the character that I already have in my head. So most of my rewriting of stuff will not change the underlying characters, but will change, you know, I'll change the point that I bring them into a story, or I'll change something about the setting. I'll change the family dynamics. Like actually one of my characters in like 3 drafts, she was an orphan. And then one of my friends was just like, what's with all these dead parents? And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm missing out on the entire family dynamic that I could have by including a back family that she could be in conflict with. They don't necessarily have to appear in the story, but she can still be thinking about them and be powered by her emotions about how she felt when she was with her family or whether they encouraged her or not.
I think I want to build on what Jade said because that's excellent. Because honestly, yeah, I mean, I tend to art my characters themselves, like their behaviors, attitudes, just their personality. Art, they already are their own individual creatures, and then considering the dynamics in which they were each raised, and how are those similar, how are those different, and how did that basically drive each character to be their own standout
To
thing.
behave differently.
Yeah, if you were given like similar circumstances, how would they behave, and the motives behind that. And really, one of the antagonists in my story definitely has that kind of situation where there's a parallel between the antagonist story and one of the protagonist stories, and that parallel, that divergence point there is, how did they respond in their familial situation? What did they do? What did they choose to do? Did they choose to hang on, or did they choose to let go? And what did they choose? Did they choose power, or did they choose the bond? And what how did that cause them to fall along these separate paths? And
having 2 characters to frame your story like that can be very like highlighting to your theme.
exactly, yeah. And Yara, she definitely has a choice, and that's obviously in the end, you'll see where it goes, but yeah, she has a choice to make based on that pretty much already set up in the story.
For me, I draw a lot from real life. A lot of my characters are based off of people that I know or even people that I don't know. The main cast of my current WIP is based off of the members of Motley Crue. And we ourselves are so informed by our own individual experiences, and we are all so different as people, depending on your cultural background, what your family life was like when you were growing up, how fast or slow you grew up, where there are so many differences and so much diversity within people that it just feels natural to put those differentiations onto characters. And drawing from real life just helps me make sure that they feel real and feel individualized.
Usually for my stories, it's kind of based on the fact that growing up, I watched a lot of shows that had kind of like anything with like superheroes or anything where it was a group where each character filled a certain archetype out of a set group of people, RPGs, stuff like that. I kind of view storytelling like that in a way. Like I guess, what would be beneficial to a situation for a particular character, and even what would be detrimental to that situation. How would another character benefit from that? How would this character not be able to get out of the situation? So on and so forth. Kind of like not exactly ticking the boxes, but figuring out like who gets what as I go through the story for their personality.
I really love that we brought up Lex, bringing up that everyone sees the world through like different lenses is such an integral part of remembering when we're writing different characters, because literally no one here in this panel is going to sit here and have the exact same experience worldview as anyone else. My worldview comes from someone who is, intersectionally marginalized. I'm trans, I'm indigenous, and I'm disabled and autistic, and I have ADHD as well as CPTSD. So my worldview is going to be completely different to y'all's. And it's so important to remember that, like, when we're building those characters, they have different experiences, which is why I am a huge fan of sensitivity readers. But we have a question from the audience, and I think that it actually piggybacks off of what we've already been talking about. And one of the things that I think is really important to talk about is, how do you differentiate character dialogue besides obvious word choices?
Okay, so for this specifically, I want to tell people about a resource. Look at the Dialogue Doctor podcast and website. He has really good resources for specifically modulating each of your characters, and there's a free spreadsheet that you can fill out for your characters, so you can kind of look at the holes and stuff. So it's not just word choice, but it's also what they don't say. So a lot of body language is still dialogue. So if I say something to someone and they don't say anything back, but they like turn their head or shrug their shoulders, that's still dialogue. So you can use that. You can also use speed. So someone could talk very quickly, have very short sentences, use small words. They could also be more like poetic and lengthy, and maybe they don't even finish their sentences and they just like die off into ellipses, or each character will have their own, like, you yourself as a person, there are some phrases that you say frequently, there are ways that you speak or ways that you infer your feelings without overtly saying them. Use all of those in your characters and use them at different tones and with different intensities, according to the situation. If the character is really worked up, everything's going to be overblown. If the character is, hiding a secret, but in a conversation, they're going to be really careful with their word choice. They're going to think before they say something, or if they don't, there's going to be consequences for that, right? And mystery is especially good for this because everyone's keeping a secret, so everyone tries to look the same, and the whole thing is about finding the differences between everyone. I hope that's helpful.
I want to interject just a little bit, and just as we're talking about dialogue, to remind the audience that one thing you want to avoid is accents or broken English to differentiate characters. One of the things that I see a lot, especially for Native American characters, is Native Americans being written with words that aren't even part of our dialect or language, but being written like we have no idea how to say any words in English. And I don't know about anybody here. I have a bachelor's in English, so I don't think I speak like that. And it's honestly just kind of, unless you are that person, it's really offensive. I give side to like Amy Tan. She wrote Broken English because, well, I don't like the term broken English, but she wrote that dialect of English because it pertained to her history and everything. So I think differentiating dialogue, yay, but also not going into racist stereotypes. Or
certainly, if you're going to put on like an accent or something like that, I really think you need to have a very good and clear reason why your character is using that. And it needs to be clear in the text so that the reader isn't going, and also it can't be overused. because it is more difficult to read. So you're going to lower the accessibility of your text if you're going to make people's brains, especially anyone who's dyslexic or, you know, has processing issues, you know, they have trouble reading that. And it's not necessarily bad to put it clearly, or have a character, you know, hear something a particular way, like within a dialogue, and then actually writing clear sentences. Just my opinion.
I don't know if I have really anything to add to that, because honestly, both of what you said was fantastic, and I don't really, in my instance, it's kind of hard to like, I would say kind of what Jade suggested, where you make it clear that, you know, this is what's happening in the text, and so as not to offend folks. I think that's really important, and just to be aware of you know, the characters that you're writing and how you're coming across. And yeah, I think having a sensitivity reader or using that website will definitely be helpful, because a lot of times it's hard to know when you're just writing, you know, you get in your own headspace, and it's really hard to consider that, oh, what I'm writing could be misconstrued as, you know, as racist, as offensive, what have you. And it's something I think that's so important to do, you know, especially even if you're self-published, like my stories can be self-published. It doesn't matter. Like, it's so important to get beta readers, to get sensitivity people to go, okay, this is okay and this is not, so it needs to change. And then being flexible enough to make those changes in the dialogue and in the characters as needed.
It's almost more important when you're self-published, because like you kind of live in this little bubble where you write what you write, and unless you go out of your way to interact with people via conversations or Twitter or watch YouTubes, or really find own voices of that, you may not.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because it's like, it's so important to just consider that that could be going on, and then, you know, how do you,
because your readers are going to come
Yeah.
with all these expectations.
Yeah.
I would also just add, so I took a dialogue workshop a few years ago, and one of the things that they really had us focus on is really listening to conversations that you're having and conversations around you, because people speak in so many different ways. Like Jade was saying, somebody might take more pauses, somebody might speak very quickly. You could have a very Gilmore Girls style person who is just going, and how many pop culture references do they throw in, and what pop culture references do they understand, and do they call something soda or pop? All these sorts of things are going to inform your readers, one, about the characters themselves, where they come from, what their background might be, how confident they feel, all these different things. And it's also going to help them differentiate between who's speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I guess just kind of want to add that I kind of pay attention to how repetitive I'm being when writing a particular set of dialogue. I try to make sure if there's like two different characters talking to each other and they're supposed to be have a different archetype or even dynamic, that they're not just saying the same phrases back and forth to each other, unless that's the express purpose of that conversation to show that's why they get along. Otherwise, it's kind of just like, why do I have two characters saying this when I could have one explain this thing to the reader?
If anyone listens to D&D podcasts, that's one of the best things to do for like just getting different voices in your head, because everyone talks differently. And then as they're cycling through like Critical Role and some other ones, that I found it really useful when I was trying to work on defining voice.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see that working really, really well. Another one is, if you're like really into art or anything, Draw Detectives on Drawfee's YouTube. It's basically D&D, but where they draw characters instead of rolling initiatives and stuff like that for things. But they get really into their character roles, and it's very, very fun. And I do think that helps, like, because you're seeing somebody basically acting as another person. And the more you subject yourself to more media and more people, the better your dialogue is going to differentiate on the page, in my opinion.
Oh, absolutely. Your brain is a computer and everything you keep feeding it is going to come out. So if you feed it lots of different conversations and different people and different ways they express themselves, then you'll see that in your own writing. Whereas if you're seeing, repetitive, boring stuff, maybe just like look for a way to inject some difference into your life.
Yeah, definitely. So last question is just going to wrap us up. I'm going to kind of join two questions. What is your favorite dynamic trope, like Sunny, Grumpy, Big Little, whatever? And what are some character relationships that you wish you saw more of in fiction?
Ooh. I really like seeing gray ace and autistically coded individuals. I kind of got really addicted to Murderbot over the last little while, and I love seeing a character that has conversations similar to what I have, or has a logical progression that doesn't know how to make sense of emotion sometimes. And because most of the time, kind of, we play in the area where people are familiar and comfortable, it's interesting to kind of step back from that and be like, what if you don't have an emotional grounding at all?
I agree, because I myself identify in a sense as, by the way, my pronouns are she, her. I don't think I said it at the start. I'm really sorry. So bad. But I identify as gray ace, and I also, I also self-diagnose as autistic. And so, yeah, I mean, having that representation is important. I feel that definitely more trans characters, queer characters, intersex characters, I think, having that representation, having that, and more than just like the standard cut and dry of, good, evil kind of situation, having that kind of in between is good. In terms of like my favorite characters to write, like in terms of a trope, right? I'm not sure if that's what you were going for. I don't know. It's kind of hard for me to say. I feel like once I recognize a character, for example, like with Critical Role, once I recognize a character, like one of my favorite characters in this campaign, the latest one, no spoilers, is Fresh Cut Grass. And because this character is always so positive and always so, like, even if the situation is terrible and it doesn't, and it's hilarious because it's just that kind of thing where the character is unintentionally funny. I think that
it makes for a really distinct voice.
Yeah, I like that. I like that kind of, in the back and forth between the really funny character and the really serious character. And the really serious character gets really upset because the funny character just keeps playing off of what they're saying, and then it kind of leads them into more trouble. And so that kind of banter, that kind of back and forth, I think is something I like to enjoy listening to and watching, and also writing is something that I like to do.
My go-to to both read and write is definitely found family. That's just my like sweet spot. And as far as something that I wish we could see more of, I am not a big fan of like romances. So anything where people can just be platonic friends and love each other platonically, I would love to be able to see more of that. And I think that we are starting to, but just more of that.
There for it.
Yes.
I was gonna say my favorite is kind of found family as well. A particular example going back again to Common Rider. My favorite season, Forze has a group called the Common Rider Club, which is just a bunch of high school kids who kind of all cover this different dynamic. There's like one character who's bisexual. There's one character who could be read. There's several characters actually could be read as autistic. One character who in story and their actors both have a disability. and that just ended up being one of my favorite dynamics because these very like wildly different characters kind of like inspired by like kind of a Breakfast Club situation where instead of trying to like the story never has them trying to change each other to fit into their dynamic. They learn to like listen, like the main character kind of gets everyone to like listen to each other and understand the different perspectives from where they're coming from in order to work better together rather than like, I learned a lesson and now I'm not going to have that trait anymore for the rest of the show and take that out of them. And I guess as far as something I'd like to see more of, I guess I would say like for either both adult and younger characters, if we have us like, I hate the trope where someone has a parent who's been horrible to them their entire life and we come back to that parent and suddenly they're forgiven, like, or even if they are forgiven, they just immediately become a part of that person's life again. Like we don't see the process of them having to either earn that or just not getting the privilege of being involved in that person's life anymore. And it seems to be like there's definitely like certain examples where it sucks that I can only count it on like probably on like both hands off the top of my head how many shows go through with that where they're like, hey, this is not an okay thing, this isn't okay in fiction, it isn't okay in real life, we're gonna have to deal with that in some way other than just saying, oh, you said you were sorry, okay.
I definitely agree. I think found family is my favorite as well because being queer, being disowned by my own family, that all has its own connotations. And I've had to build my own family. So that's just my reality. So that's going to be obviously, I get to see myself represented in found family tropes. And you see a lot of misfit friend groups, and those are my favorite. And it's probably why I like things like Six of Crows and stuff like that. But so we're going to wrap up here.
This video was recorded at the event Storycrafting Sessions Character Development, hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group in partnership with Renaissance Press. To learn more about this and other events hosted by the Weeknight Writers Group, check out businessforauthors.com/weeknight-writers.